Take you to Lebanon County, where the district attorney is expected to release new details into last week's shooting that claimed the life of Lebanon City Police Officer Lieutenant William Lebo and injured 2 other officers.
We're going to take you to the Lebanon County Courthouse right now for the latest.
On March 31st of 2022, the Lebanon City Police Department was dispatched to a private residence located at 1108 Forest Street in Lebanon City. The caller reported his stepson, identified as Travis SHAUD, broke into his home. Lebanon City Police responded. 4 uniformed officers ultimately entered that residence. At his first opportunity, SHAUD fired upon police. Police returned fire. SHAUD was then pronounced dead on scene. Lieutenant William Lebo sustained multiple gunshots from SHAUD's attack. While responding officers attempted life-saving measures, the lieutenant's injuries proved too great. Lieutenant William Lebo gave his life in the line of duty on March 31st. SHAUD's assault, his attack, struck 2 additional officers. Each officer was rushed to the hospital and received emergency surgery and medical care. Thankfully, each officer is stable and recovering at this time. Our investigation revealed SHAUD's background. On the day of his attack, SHAUD was on parole for assault. His history showed a protection from abuse order and a PFA violation. SHAUD's family described a history of years-long mental afflictions. SHAUD refused treatment. Family attempted intervention efforts. SHAUD resisted. In the months which preceded this assault, SHAUD had largely cut off all familial ties. On March 31st, one of SHAUD's family members returned to his home on Forest Street after work. He went to the rear of that residence and realized SHAUD forcibly smashed a window and had broken into his home. The family member phoned for police. The Lebanon City Police then responded to Forest Street. They met with family members. They generated a layout of the residence. They developed a plan to enter that home. The city police officers went with the family member, the homeowner, to that residence. The homeowner safely retrieved his dog from inside. The homeowner was then safely able to leave that residence. Now, notably, the first floor of that home contains multiple windows. When the Lebanon City Police Department responded, they did so in marked patrol vehicles. When they approached that residence, each officer wore a Lebanon City Police uniform. His badge, his city police patch was displayed. This allowed SHAUD to visually identify the 4 officers. This allowed SHAUD to lay in wait for those officers inside that residence. The 4 police officers went to the rear of the home. Lieutenant Lebo was first in line. Lieutenant Lebo carried a police shield, drew his firearm, and announced the presence of law enforcement. He requested SHAUD come to the back door and meet with police. And while SHAUD initially approached law enforcement, he concealed his hands. Lieutenant Lebo asked him to show his hands to be compliant. SHAUD refused. SHAUD grabbed a loaded handgun, and he took his first opportunity to fire upon the law enforcement officers. SHAUD fired initially 3 rounds. Those rounds struck Lieutenant Lebo and Officer Derek Undercuffler. Neither man was able to defend himself. Neither man was able to fire upon the suspect. Neither man was able to fend off the immediate evil he faced that day. SHAUD continued his assault on police. He continued firing. Officer Ryan Adams and Officer Chris McCarrick took cover. They fired back. They acted fearlessly and bravely to defend their own lives and that of their brothers. Even once initially struck by law enforcement, SHAUD continued fire. Officer Adams and Officer McCarrick returned fire. They prevailed and they neutralized the threat. Officer McCarrick carried Officer Undercuffler to safety. He secured the scene. He then went back and attempted to save Lieutenant Lebo. He remained with his lieutenant until additional help arrived. Even once injured, Officer Adams was able to escape and able to radio for help. He notified law enforcement there were multiple officers down inside. He requested every available police officer in the near area respond, and they did. That day, every local police department, the Lebanon County Sheriff's Department, and the Lebanon County Probation Department responded. They helped get the wounded to safety. They tried every life-saving measure possible on Officer Lebo, and they saved 2 of our city police officers that day. Despite every effort possible, there was nothing that could be done for Lieutenant Lebo. His injuries were too great, and we lost one of our own. Officer Lebo's death marks the first line-of-duty death in Lebanon County in over 100 years. Every day, we expect our police officers to suit up, patrol our streets, and keep us safe. And every day, with every call, with every scene they respond to, our police officers take that ultimate risk, and they do that for each of us. Behind every one of your police officers, behind everyone that wears a badge, is a person. It's a son, it's a daughter, it's a husband, it's a wife, it's a mother, it's a father. Behind every officer you see, every officer you encounter on the street, stands someone else's entire world. And every day, they go out and they do their jobs for all of us. When danger looms every day but fails to occur, it's very easy to take peace and to take our safety for granted. Lieutenant Lebo ended his watch on March 31st. He laid down his life for his brothers and for our community. He and his family paid the highest price. They made the ultimate sacrifice to protect us. Lieutenant William Lebo is survived by his wife Laura, his mother Rena, and his daughter Corinne. Born in Italy, he and his family came to the United States when his father returned from military service. He became a police officer in Lebanon City, and he served honorably for 40 years. After decades of service, Lieutenant Lebo was set to retire on May 1st of 2022. He and his family will never experience the joy of retirement. They will never know the peace of this life post a career in law enforcement. This past weekend, Laura, his wife, issued a statement. Laura's words conveyed a message of forgiveness and one of love. Laura asked we remember the man that we lost and not the evil that took his life. Laura has shown herself to be a woman of the highest caliber. In the midst of her grief, at a time where she could understandably be angry, Laura chose love. Words cannot properly express the overwhelming sadness, the shock, and the loss that currently ripples through this community. We expect our police officers still every day to suit up, go out, and protect each of us. They do so now with heavy hearts. They miss their brother. They worry about those who responded, but yet feel helpless. They carry unnecessary but understandable guilt. Laura serves as the example we all need today. We as a community, all of our police officers, we must somehow now move forward. Over this past week, I've spent a great deal of time reflecting on the shooting and its aftermath. The term heroic fails to adequately describe the efforts of every police officer that day, every officer who responded. Lieutenant Lebo selflessly laid down his life for the lives of his brothers. And when you look at the other officers that day, Officer Undercuffler, wounded, unaware of the true extent of his injuries, fought to survive. Officers McCarrick and Officer Adams fought for each other. They fought to protect the wounded. Officer McCarrick rescued his brother. He got him out, and he returned to his lieutenant. He persevered. Officer Adams, bleeding from his injuries, cared only about saving those who remained inside. These officers and Lieutenant Lebo took every single action we as a community could possibly expect from our police. And when someone is at his lowest, at his weakest, at his scariest moment, he shows the true nature of the person he is. On March 31st, the Lebanon City Police Department showed themselves to be brave and honorable to the utmost degree. Being your district attorney, I grasp for the words necessary to talk about this shooting. Words themselves are inadequate. They fail to properly address the loss we suffered and the grief we all share. All I can say to the Lebo family, to every single one of our police officers, I am so grateful to each of you, and I'm also so heartbreakingly and truly sorry. We as a community now have a choice, and we can choose to focus on the evil that was that day. If we do that, we allow that evil to win. Instead, we can choose to focus on the man who Lieutenant Lebo was, the son, the husband, the father, the person he chose to be every single day. We can focus on the brave and selfless and courageous actions of Officer Undercuffler, Officer Adams, and Officer McCarrick. We can focus on the selflessness that was shown by every other police officer, every sheriff, every probation officer that responded that day. And in speaking to our police officers, the message I've tried to convey is that this shooting does not define us. This shooting does not define Lebanon County or the people who live here. When you look at Saturday, the processional to bring Lieutenant Lebo home, none of us knew what to expect. And the people of this community came out in droves. They stood for hours by the roadside with signs, with flags. They put their hands over their hearts and they thanked us. And I can tell you that in speaking to our police officers, they are so grateful for that showing of support. The outpouring of love, of kindness, and of compassion from this community is what defines us. And to the officers that day, the officers who survived, the officer we lost, the bravery shown is what defines us. We as a community have to move forward. We have to move forward united and with hope. And the message I want to end with today is simply one of gratitude. It's gratitude for the people of this community who have supported our police officers in this police department. And it's also to every single police officer, probation officer, and sheriff deputy who was on scene that day. Many of them stand before you. This is an emotional time for them. It is for all of us. But to every single person, I just want to say thank you so, so much. And we stand here in utter awe of the people we have in this community. What we ask you now collectively to move forward in the face of what would otherwise be the utmost evil, we ask you now to choose hope, and we ask you now to choose love. Thank you.
Here, how many firearms were found in the home after the incident?
Do you mean law enforcement firearms or
No,
personal?
Her earlier statement was that, I thought, I'm paraphrasing, multiple firearms were found in the house after the search after the incident. How many were found?
There are a large number of firearms found in the residence. Only one was used in the assault on law enforcement.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Where was the gun that he picked up here and shot the officers?
It was inside the home.
So he kind of grabbed for it.
He was able to reach for that firearm and immediately fire upon police, yes.
Did the officers have their guns drawn at that time?
They did. Based on the nature of the incident, there was no way for the first two officers who were shot to have been able to react, respond, or defend themselves. The first two officers were not able to fire a single round.
Did Lieutenant Lebo or any of the two other officers have previous encounters with SHAUD?
He was known to the Lebanon City Police Department, just based on the prior history, and obviously when we respond to a scene, we do want to know if somebody's on supervision, what they're on supervision for. That much of it was known. Whether or not any of them had an individual encounter, I can't tell you.
I think it was previously mentioned, the call initially came in at 3:30, shots were fired at 4:24, so that roughly hour period, is that the planning you mentioned and the getting the dog out and the homeowner out?
Yes, there were efforts made to speak to the homeowner, figure out the layout of the residence, what the rooms looked like, where they were, and just to get some basic information. And also, we wanted to make sure we had backup officers, so it just took a bit of time to get that planned and then laid out.
Did the guns belong to the family, or did some belong to him, and did he get permits for them?
The family member lawfully owned all the firearms that were used that day.
Did the family member confront SHAUD, or did he not go in once he saw the broken window?
There was no confrontation between SHAUD and the family member that day. That's right. He immediately phoned for law enforcement once he realized what was going on inside the house.
Was anyone else home at the time?
No.
Were there previous threats made between SHAUD and the family member to return home?
There were arguments, and there were some encounters that I would not label as good-natured in terms of threats, not that he conveyed to us, but it was clear that upon seeing someone break into your house, you want police officers rather than deal with that situation yourself.
And what was their relation?
It was stepfather, stepson.
Had Sean entered the house without authorization before this date, broken in?
Not that we were aware of, no.
Okay.
How is Officer Underkoffler, can you describe how Officer Underkoffler is doing?
I can. He remains hospitalized. He is stable. Every day he gets stronger. Every day he recovers more, so.
And Officer McCarrick, sounds like he was very heroic. Is he here today? And what would you like to say about him, his actions?
That's an interesting question. So we've actually spoken with Officer McCarrick this week. He is just so grateful to serve with the men that he served with that day. And I would say that he did every single thing possible that he could have done to save his fellow officers and to get himself out of there safely. So we thank him more than words can ever express. We thank him for that.
How long has he been a police officer?
He's relatively new to the police department.
You mentioned the various windows throughout the house. So while 4 officers were approaching the home, were the other officers that were on the street, were they shielded?
There was only one additional officer, and he was in the front of the residence in case there was someone that would have come out of the front door of the home. So everyone was around the home, everyone was in uniform, everyone had a badge displayed. It was very clear that law enforcement was going in.
So SHAUD was known by the police department. Was his medical conditions known as well as they were looking at that?
So he had no medical conditions. There was not a disability, there was not anything of that nature. The family members after the incident had described to us that he had a years-long history with the mental health system. He was resistant to medication, resistant to all treatment efforts, and anytime the family tried to intervene on his behalf, he refused.
I'm sorry. I saw something on social media. Will tomorrow's celebration of life be televised or live streamed?
I don't know the answer to that question.
So, thank you. So media has a prepared area. I don't have that information at hand right now. That is all still being planned, but you will receive that information. I think some of you have already received a designated area. I do not believe it's on the Giant Center property itself. I believe it's across the street, and rightfully so, for the privacy of everyone involved.
Yeah, we didn't know, they would want it to be.
Right. I know that there was some discussion about live streaming, so you would have a feed. I don't know that that's been finalized as of yet.
And it may be too soon, when you're dealing with a mental illness, we've had these cases, is it something to look at of trying to bring in a mental health counselor in something like this? I don't know if it's too soon to weigh in on something like that.
So every law enforcement response is going to be a case-by-case determination. When you look at an incident like this, the first chance that he had to fire and shoot someone, he took it. So if you send in someone who isn't carrying a shield, who isn't trained with a firearm, who isn't wearing a bulletproof vest, you're putting that person's life at risk, just as you are any of these individuals. The difference is the training in the background. The initial call was not to arrest, it was not to submit, it was not anything other than, please just come out and talk to us. And from the initial request of show yourself, show your hands, it was met with utter resistance. And from there, he escalated it from a simple, I'm not going to show you my hands, to drawing a firearm and immediately continuing with a hail of gunfire within seconds. So in this instance, I don't believe that would have been appropriate by any means.
Just to be clear, the gun wasn't on him at the time, he just...
Correct, he was able to grab that gun at his first opportunity almost immediately, and his first action was to point and to fire at close range.
Do you know when the officers entered the house, it sounds like from the rear, what's the first room that they would have stepped into? Kitchen, back porch?
It's a kitchen area.
Kitchen, okay.
Kitchen area. All right. Thank you very much.
You were just listening to the Lebanon County District Attorney give an update on the shooting that happened a week ago today on March 31st in Lebanon. It is the shooting that killed Lebanon City Police Lieutenant William Lebo and injured 2 other officers. A big topic of this news conference today, and what we learned is kind of the moments that led up to that shooting and how the officers reacted once that shooting happened. We know 4 officers responded. Lieutenant Lebo was the first one on that line, and he was also the one to be shot and killed. 2 other officers were shot as well. We do know one of them at least is still in the hospital. And there was another officer there the whole time that was sitting with Lieutenant Lebo, trying to help the other officers as well. The DA there kind of just talked about the bravery and the hardship that has been happening in the Lebanon community ever since.
Yeah, it's the first line of duty death, I should say, in Lebanon County in, 100 years? So you can see just how devastated the community is, and even on her face, the DA there. So and we do know memorial service for Lieutenant Lebo will be held tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock at the Giant Center in Derry Township, Dauphin County. Not open to the media, but the public is welcome to come. Yeah, just a terrible situation coming out from Lebanon County, and we will have the very latest on the investigation later today on Fox 43 News first at 4 and on our website, fox43.com.